The sun had long since dipped below the skyline, casting a deep orange glow over the worn-down buildings of West Hollow. Streetlights flickered to life, their dull hum the only sound on the otherwise quiet block. In this part of town, the days stretched long, and the nights felt even longer. 8-year-old Liam Carter sat curled up on the small, tattered couch in the corner of a cramped one-bedroom apartment, absently tracing the faded patterns on the fabric. His mother, Sarah, wasn't home yet. She was never home this early. Most nights, she worked double shifts, cleaning houses in the mornings and waiting tables at a rundown diner until well past midnight. It was the only way she could afford rent and keep food on the table. Liam understood, even if he hated the loneliness. He glanced at the clock on the peeling, yellowed wall. 9:47 p.m. His stomach grumbled, but he ignored it. His mother had promised to bring home something for dinner, though he wouldn't be surprised if she forgot. It wasn't her fault, she always tried. Liam sighed and pulled his knees up to his chest. His thin arms wrapped around himself for warmth, though the room wasn't particularly cold. He reached over and grabbed his most prized possession, an old, oversized t-shirt. The fabric was soft, worn from years of washing, the once bright blue now a dull gray. Across the front, faded but still legible, were the words, "Daddy's little hero." It was the only thing his father had ever given him. Sarah never spoke about his dad. Liam had vague memories of a deep voice, a strong presence, someone who used to lift him onto broad shoulders and make him laugh. But those memories felt like dreams now, blurry and distant. His father had left when Liam was too young to understand why, and his mother never explained. All Liam knew was that Sarah worked too hard, worried too much, and loved him fiercely. Sarah Carter had always been a fighter. Life had never given her much, but she never stopped pushing forward. Every morning, she left before the sun rose, scrubbing the floors of houses she would never be able to afford. Every night, she smiled at rude customers, served meals she could barely afford for herself, and collected tips that barely covered their utilities. Some nights, when she thought Liam was asleep, she sat at the tiny kitchen table, staring at bills she couldn't pay. Her hands would clench into fists, her lip quivering as she forced back tears. But in the morning, she would wake up, kiss her son's forehead, and pretend everything was fine, because she had to. Liam saw through it, though. He always saw through it. Liam had learned, far earlier than most kids, how to take care of himself. He knew how to make a peanut butter sandwich when his stomach grumbled, how to pour a glass of milk without spilling. He knew to lock the doors at night, to ignore the shouting from the apartment next door, and to keep his head down when walking home from school. It wasn't that he was afraid. He had just learned that in West Hollow, the world didn't stop for little boys who needed help. Despite everything, Liam was different from the other kids in his neighborhood. While many fell into trouble, skipping school, running with the wrong crowd, Liam held on to something precious. Hope. He was smart, his teachers said so. He loved reading, especially stories about heroes, people who rose from nothing and made something of themselves. In those pages, he found a world where things could be different, where kids like him could become something more. His mother always told him, "We might not have much, but we have kindness, and that's worth more than money." Liam believed her. That night, as he sat alone in the dimly lit apartment, the streets outside were unusually quiet. He traced the letters on his worn-out shirt, feeling the fabric between his fingers. Daddy's little hero. He had never been a hero. He had never even met a real hero. But deep inside, something told him that was about to change. And soon, the whole world would know his name. The night was restless, the city shrouded in an eerie silence that only made Liam's small apartment feel colder, emptier. The clock on the wall read 11:02 p.m. His mother was supposed to be home hours ago. She was never this late. Liam sat at the kitchen table, his fingers idly drumming against the surface. His stomach ached, not just from hunger, but from the creeping fear curling in his chest. He had waited patiently, staring at the door as if willing it to open, but the deadbolt remained locked, the apartment eerily still. Something was wrong. Sarah Carter was always exhausted, always overworked, but she was reliable. No matter how tired she was, no matter how long her shift stretched, she always came home. Always. A heavy raindrop smacked against the window, then another. Within seconds, the skies opened, and a downpour began, thick and unrelenting. Liam's heart pounded. What if she got caught in the storm? What if something bad happened? His hands gripped the edges of his oversized t-shirt, the worn fabric bunching beneath his fingers. The familiar lettering, "Daddy's Little Hero," pressed against his skin like a quiet reminder. Heroes didn't sit and wait. Liam tried calling his mother's phone for the third time. No answer. Just the same cold, robotic voicemail. He bit his lip, his breath coming faster now. He felt helpless, a feeling he despised. No one was going to come knocking on the door with answers. No one was going to tell him everything was okay. He had to find her. The thought scared him. The streets of West Hollow weren't safe, especially not at this hour. His mother had always warned him to never go outside alone at night. But what choice did he have? Without hesitating another second, Liam grabbed his thin, patched-up hoodie, pulling it over his head. His sneakers were worn down, the soles barely holding together, but he slipped them on anyway. With one last glance at the empty apartment, he unlocked the door and stepped into the cold, wet night. The rain pounded against him immediately, soaking through his hoodie within seconds. The wind howled, pushing against his small frame, but he kept moving. One step, then another. He had to find her. The streets were eerily quiet, except for the distant sound of sirens and the occasional flickering streetlight. Puddles formed on the cracked pavement, reflecting the dull glow of neon signs from the few convenience stores still open at this hour. Liam's small hands were clenched into fists inside his sleeves, his breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. He had no idea where to start. He just kept walking, hoping for some kind of sign, some indication of where his mother might be. And then he heard it, a deep voice, gruff and impatient, somewhere near the alley ahead. Liam slowed his steps, his heart hammering against his ribs. He peered around the corner and saw two men standing under the dim glow of a flickering street lamp. They were talking in low, hushed voices, one of them shifting nervously from foot to foot. And just behind them, a diner uniform, his mother's uniform. His mother. She was sitting on the ground, her back against the brick wall, her body slumped slightly to one side. Her cheek was bruised, her lip bleeding. One of the men, the one with the heavy coat and cigarette dangling from his fingers, was staring down at her, talking too low for Liam to hear. Panic flooded his chest. What were they doing to her? Why wasn't she moving? His feet felt frozen in place, but his mind was screaming at him to do something. Anything. And then, as if on cue, something caught his eye at the end of the block. A police car, parked near the gas station. The officer inside was sipping coffee, oblivious to the scene unfolding just a few feet away. Liam ran. His sneakers splashed through puddles as he sprinted toward the police car, rain blurring his vision. His lungs burned, but he pushed forward, his small body fueled by pure desperation. Help! His voice cracked, barely audible over the storm. Help! The officer looked up, startled. Liam reached the car, slamming his palms against the window, breathless and drenched. The officer rolled down the window, his brows furrowing in confusion. "What's wrong, kid?" Liam struggled to catch his breath. He pointed down the street, his words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "My mom. There's these guys, they hurt her. Please, you have to help." The officer's face hardened. "Where?" Liam turned, gesturing wildly. But before he could say another word, the officer's expression shifted, from confusion to something else. His gaze had locked onto Liam's shirt. The rain had soaked through the fabric completely, making the faded lettering cling to the boy's chest. The words, "Daddy's Little Hero," stood out under the dull glow of the street lamp. The officer's face paled. His grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Stay here," he said quickly, pushing open the car door. "Stay right here." Then, with urgent precision, he reached for his radio. Something had changed. Liam didn't understand what it was, but as the officer stepped out, hand hovering over his holster, a single terrifying thought crashed into him like a tidal wave. He knows something. He knows my father. The night air was thick with the scent of rain-soaked pavement as Officer James Carter stepped out of his patrol car. The boy stood before him, shivering, his breath coming in quick, panicked gasps. Raindrops clung to his small face, blending with the silent tears running down his cheeks. But James wasn't looking at the boy's face. His eyes were locked on the shirt. Daddy's little hero. A storm of emotions churned inside him. His stomach twisted, his breath hitched in his throat. That shirt, it wasn't just any shirt. It was the same one he had bought for his son, Nathan, years ago. A ghost from the past. His hands clenched into fists at his sides as memories surged forward, unbidden. Nathan had been just about this boy's age when he disappeared, just 6 years old. One moment, he was in their backyard, playing with his toy trucks, the sunlight catching in his golden hair. The next, he was gone. The search had lasted for months. Flyers were plastered on every street corner, his face haunting every television screen in the city. James had scoured every alley, every abandoned building, every dark corner of West Hollow. But there had been nothing. No leads, no answers, no closure. And now, standing in front of him was a boy wearing Nathan's exact shirt. His pulse pounded in his ears. His body felt frozen, yet electrified with an energy he hadn't felt in years. This couldn't be a coincidence. "Officer, please." Liam's voice broke through James's spiraling thoughts. "You have to help my mom. She's in trouble." James blinked, snapping back to the present. The boy's eyes were wide with terror, his small hands gripping his damp hoodie. His mother, right? That's why he had run to the police in the first place. James forced himself to focus. Later, he would deal with the shirt. Later, he would demand answers. Right now, someone was in danger. "Where is she?" James asked, his voice calm but firm. Liam turned, pointing toward the alley where he had seen his mother. "Down there. 2 guys. One of them hit her. Please, you have to hurry." James didn't waste another second. His instincts kicked in. He reached for his radio. "This is Officer Carter. Possible assault in progress near West Hollow Diner. Request immediate backup." A crackle of static, then the dispatcher's voice. "Copy that. Units en route." James turned back to Liam. "Stay here." "But..." "Stay here." His voice left no room for argument. And then he was moving, his boots splashing through puddles as he sprinted toward the alley. James rounded the corner and immediately spotted them. 2 men, one tall and burly, the other wiry with darting eyes. They loomed over a woman slumped against the wall. Her uniform soaked with rain, her face bruised and bloodied. Sarah Carter, Liam's mother. The taller man, the one with the cigarette, looked up as James approached. His eyes narrowed. Trouble. James didn't slow. His gun stayed holstered, but his hand hovered near it. Ready. "Step away from her. Now." The wiry man raised his hands in mock innocence. "Relax, officer. We were just having a conversation." "Didn't look like a conversation to me." Sarah groaned softly, her head rolling to the side. She was still conscious. Barely. "Move," James ordered. Cigarette man took a slow drag, exhaling smoke in James's direction. "You got no idea what you're walking into, cop." James's patience snapped. "Last warning. Step back." For a second, he thought they might resist. But then, the sound of approaching sirens echoed through the streets. The wiry man cursed under his breath. "Come on," he muttered to his partner. With one last glare, the 2 men backed away, disappearing into the darkness just as a second police cruiser pulled up. James dropped to his knees beside Sarah. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" She blinked sluggishly, trying to focus. "Liam, he's safe," James assured her. "Help is here." Her body sagged with relief before her eyes fluttered shut. Minutes later, paramedics were loading Sarah onto a stretcher, an oxygen mask pressed to her face. Liam stood nearby, watching everything with wide, fearful eyes. His small hands trembled as he hugged himself, his soaked clothes sticking to his thin frame. James approached him carefully. "Your mom's gonna be okay." Liam nodded, but he still looked shaken. James hesitated. The question burned inside him, but he forced himself to keep his voice even. "Where did you get that shirt?" Liam looked down, as if only now realizing what he was wearing. "My mom gave it to me." James's heart pounded. "Where did she get it?" I don't know," Liam admitted. "She said it was mine since I was a baby." The words hit James like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just some shirt. This was his son's shirt. His son's favorite shirt. A horrifying thought clawed its way into his mind. What if Nathan didn't disappear? What if he was taken? And what if, somehow, the boy standing in front of him was the answer to a mystery that had haunted him for years? James swallowed hard, forcing himself to stay calm. "Liam," he said gently, "what's your last name?" Liam hesitated, his brows furrowing slightly. "Carter." James felt the world tilt beneath him. That was his last name. His blood ran cold. And in that moment, as the rain continued to fall and the sirens faded into the distance, James knew one thing for certain. This was far from over. The night had settled into an eerie stillness, the streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement. James stood by his patrol car, gripping the edges of the door as he tried to steady himself. The name Carter echoed in his mind like a relentless drumbeat. Liam Carter. The boy's wide eyes searched James's face, confusion written all over his young features. He didn't understand why the officer had suddenly turned pale, why his hands trembled as he stared at him. But James understood. This wasn't just a coincidence. This was a nightmare from his past, returning in the most unexpected way. James took a shaky breath, kneeling down to meet Liam's gaze. His voice was careful, controlled, though inside, a storm raged. "Liam, you said your mom gave you that shirt. Do you remember when?" The boy thought for a moment. "She said it was mine when I was really little. She told me. My dad gave it to me." James's breath hitched. "Your dad?" His voice almost cracked. "Did your mom ever tell you his name?" Liam frowned slightly, biting his lip as he tried to recall. "She doesn't talk about him much. She just said he had to leave." His gaze dropped, and his voice grew softer. "She told me he didn't want to be with us anymore." James's heart clenched painfully. He knew Sarah had left him, but he had spent years searching, trying to understand why she had taken Nathan and disappeared without a trace. Every effort had led to dead ends, and eventually, he had been forced to accept the worst, that they were gone beyond his reach. But now, Liam stood right in front of him. Nathan. James swallowed hard. Could it really be? "Liam, where's your mom now?" The boy's shoulders sagged. "I don't know. She was supposed to come back. But..." He hesitated, looking up with a mixture of fear and uncertainty. "She never did." James's gut twisted. He had seen Sarah get loaded into an ambulance just moments ago, unconscious and bruised. She hadn't abandoned Liam. She was fighting for her life. Without wasting another second, James pulled out his phone and called the hospital. "This is Officer Carter. A woman named Sarah Carter was just brought in. She was attacked. I need an update on her condition. Now." The voice on the other end hesitated before responding. "She's in surgery, officer. Multiple internal injuries. It's serious." James closed his eyes briefly, exhaling through his nose. He had so many questions, so much anger, but none of that mattered right now. Sarah needed to survive. Liam needed her. And if James was right, asterisk asterisk if this really was Nathan, asterisk asterisk then he had already lost too much time. He wouldn't lose his son again. James didn't waste time. He took Liam to the station, making sure he was fed and warm. The boy had been through too much already, and James wasn't about to push him for more answers until they had solid proof. It took 3 days for the DNA test results to come back. James barely slept. He spent every spare moment by Sarah's hospital bed, waiting for her to wake up. He couldn't confront her until he had evidence. And when he finally got the call from the lab, he already knew the truth in his heart. 99.99% match. Liam was Nathan, his son. Sarah's eyes fluttered open, hazy from pain medication. The hospital room was dim, the rhythmic beeping of the machines the only sound filling the space. She blinked a few times, her gaze finally settling on the man standing at her bedside. James. Her breath caught in her throat. She had always feared this day would come. James stared down at her, his expression unreadable, but his hands were clenched into fists at his sides. His voice, when he spoke, was low and controlled. Why? Sarah swallowed, her throat dry. James, why did you take him from me? Tears pricked at her eyes, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. I didn't have a choice. His jaw tensed. You always had a choice, Sarah, but you made one that destroyed me. She let out a shaky breath. You don't understand. Then make me understand. He shot back, his voice laced with years of pain. Sarah closed her eyes, guilt pressing down on her chest like a weight she had carried for too long. I was scared, James. Scared of what would happen if I stayed. After you lost your partner, you changed. You were angry, distant. You drank too much. I didn't know how to help you. She hesitated. And then that night. You don't remember, do you? James frowned, his mind scrambling for memories he had tried to bury. You came home drunk, she whispered. You didn't hurt me, but you weren't the man I married anymore. I was afraid you'd lose yourself completely. I was afraid Nathan would grow up seeing that. So I left. James's breath caught in his throat. The truth hit him like a punch to the gut. He had driven her away. His silence was deafening, and Sarah let out a shaky sigh. I thought I was protecting him, but I never stopped loving you. Her voice broke, and I never stopped regretting it. James turned away, his hands shaking. It was too much loss, too much pain. But one thing mattered more than his anger, more than the past. Liam, his son. And this time, he wouldn't let him go. Sarah was released from the hospital a week later. James took Nathan, home with him in the meantime. The boy had warmed up to him quickly, their bond forming effortlessly despite the years stolen from them. The day Sarah was discharged, James brought Liam to see her. The moment she opened her arms, he ran into them, sobbing into her chest. I thought you weren't coming back, he whispered. Sarah kissed the top of his head. I'll always come back for you. James watched them, his heart heavy yet full in a way it hadn't been in years. When Sarah met his gaze, there was an unspoken question in her eyes. Can we fix this? James didn't know the answer yet, but he did know one thing: he wasn't walking away. Not this time. Liam deserved a family, and maybe, just maybe, this was their chance to finally be one again. The morning sun streamed through the hospital window, casting soft golden rays across the sterile white room. Sarah stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. Her body ached, every movement slow and deliberate, but none of it mattered. Not when her eyes landed on the small figure curled up beside her hospital bed. Liam. Her heart clenched as she watched him sleep, his tiny hands still gripping hers even in slumber. He had been so strong through all of this, far stronger than any child should ever have to be. And yet, through all the fear and uncertainty, he had never let go of hope. Sarah reached out, brushing a lock of dark hair from his forehead. At that moment, she silently vowed that she would never let him suffer again. She had spent so many years running, so many years afraid of facing her past. But now, the past had caught up with her in the most unexpected way. James was back, and this time he wasn't letting go. The soft creak of the door pulled Sarah's attention away from Liam. James stepped inside, his expression unreadable, his eyes locking onto hers. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then James sighed, running a hand through his hair as he stepped closer. He's incredible, he murmured, his voice softer than she expected. Smart, kind, he's got your heart. Sarah swallowed hard. And your eyes. James flinched slightly, his gaze dropping to the floor. I missed so much. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. I know. A heavy silence filled the room. James pulled a chair closer and sat down, his hands clasped together. I'm not here to take him away from you, Sarah. His voice was firm, resolute. I just want to be his father. I want to make up for lost time, in whatever way you'll let me. Sarah let out a shaky breath, emotions warring within her. She had spent years telling herself she had done the right thing, that keeping Liam away from James had been necessary. But looking at him now, she saw something she hadn't allowed herself to believe in a long time change. James wasn't the same broken man she had left behind. He was stronger now, wiser, and he was here, for Liam, for her, and maybe, just maybe, for the family they had lost. Later that evening, James took Liam out for a walk around the hospital gardens. The boy held onto his hand tightly, his small fingers clutching James's with the quiet desperation of a child who had spent too long feeling alone. James cleared his throat. Liam, do you like baseball? Liam looked up at him, eyes wide. I've never played. James smiled softly. Well, that just means we'll have to change that. Liam studied him carefully. Are you gonna stay? James's breath hitched. He knelt in front of Liam, holding onto his small shoulders. If you'll have me, he said gently. Liam hesitated. Then, without warning, he lunged forward, wrapping his arms around James's neck. I want you to stay. James swallowed hard, hugging his son tightly. Then I'm not going anywhere. Sarah was discharged from the hospital a week later. James helped her pack up the tiny apartment she had been struggling to afford, insisting that she and Liam stay with him while they figured out their next steps. It wasn't easy. There were still wounds left unhealed, ghosts from the past that lingered in the spaces between them. But there was also something new, hope. James enrolled Liam in a new school, picked him up every afternoon, and spent his evenings helping him with homework. Slowly but surely, they found their rhythm, learning to navigate this fragile, newfound family dynamic. One evening, as they sat together at the dinner table, Liam looked between his parents and smiled. For the first time, it feels like home. Sarah met James's gaze, tears glistening in her eyes. Maybe it wasn't perfect. Maybe they still had a long way to go. But for the first time in years, they were a family again. And that was enough.